welcome to the left-hand Rath circuit analysis video. For the longest time, I've been very curious about this pedal, what makes it tick, what it is exactly. There's always been a lot of hype around it, so today we're going to find out. All right, so before we get into this, gonna have to do a little bit of a history lesson to get everyone up to speed. What you're looking at right now, as far as I know, this is one of the earliest, probably prototypes that Joe from Lone Wolf Audio, then Enormous Door, and now I think Void. This is one of the first prototypes, or maybe even production pedals, who knows, that he had going. And as you can see from looking at the PCB, like that does not look like the left-hand Rath at all. This picture was sent to me, and the closest thing that I can find to this is a Mad Bean chunk pedal. So I don't know if that was the original basis or base, excuse me, for his idea, but the person that sent that to me, that is going to remain anonymous, they told me like it does not have any HM2 characteristics. So just keep in mind what that looks like as far as the layout and the components that are on it. Because if you compare it to the Mad Bean Chunk, it's got very similar components. It's got the four, I believe those are bias trim pots. It is not IC based. It's running on transistor, 5 transistors each. So it's got that. It's got the same 6 controls, volume gain, 3-band EQ with the presence control being the 4th band. So from that, we go to the Enormous Door LHP. And you can take a look there. This is what the left-hand Rath, for the most part, has always looked like. You compare that to what came next, the Lone Wolf Audio left-hand Rath, and you compare those two PCBs, and you can tell they're identical. The company name and the pedal name has changed, the year changed, but as far as the components, the layouts, whatnot, the part count, everything's identical. All right, so to do a proper circuit analysis, you need to get into the circuit. So what I did is I got this one knob left-hand Rath, disassembled the pedal, depopulated the PCB, documented all of the component values and placement, and this is what I was left with, is just a blank PCB. At this point, there's nothing in your way to trace the PCB. And for those of you that don't know, tracing is basically where you're just documenting the path of the circuit, how and where everything is connected. Reverse engineering is completely legal, so all the keyboard warriors can just calm down. That's how most of your electronics are made. Okay, so once I traced the PCB, this is what I was left with. That's the actual trace of the PCB. It's not my creativity. That is an absolute plate of spaghetti and a great reason why you do not run auto routing. It's an absolute mess. The first thing that I noticed is there's no voltage or ground plane, which honestly I've never seen that in a production PCB. In my opinion, it defeats the purpose of having a PCB, like a manufactured one like this. And just my opinion, like I am an amateur, but That is my opinion why this thing pops diodes. Instead of having a voltage plane where everything is charged immediately, and then you've got your ground plane on the other layer, everything's grounded immediately. When you engage the pedal, and the power has to run through the path of the traces like a lightning bolt because it is instantaneous. So, that's just my assumption. The power has to hit, what is it? I think it's like 5 vias before it hits the first component. So, this thing is just like got instability written all over it. So from this point, I basically went through and started writing out a schematic for it. But I found something rather interesting when I did that. This was part for part, placement for placement, identical to the Dunwich modded HM2, the one with the left hand on it, the 4-band, 6-knob, whatever you want to call it, and not even mildly. It's like identical. The only thing that was really different were a small handful of components. The main part of the circuit is virtually identical. The EQ is the only thing that really stands out different than the Dunwich, but the EQ itself isn't unique, and we'll get into that next. Okay, just something to keep in mind before I get into the schematic. So this is what I showed originally, the very first enormous door. Compare that to the production enormous door. Like, take a look at the PCBs, look at the layout. Notice how they look nothing alike. So that's a huge jump from a PCB that Joe's mentioned even himself at first, like he couldn't get working. And that's actually well documented on Free Stomp boxes and an interview that he did with Dome on his interview video on Dome's channel. So he went from that to the enormous door, and then compare that to the Dunwich PCB and look at the general layout. Just because something comes to market first doesn't mean that it's first or that it is original. Not everyone's in a race to release things, so just keep an eye on that. Like, look how methodical, well thought out the layout is on the Dunwich, the PCB on the top. People who design PCBs, like, you can look at that and you can tell which capacitor sets capacitor pairs are for which parts of the EQ just by looking at it. Everything is set exactly where it needs to be for a clean, efficient layout. Okay, now for the schematic. The one on top, the black and white one, is the Dunwich, and mine is the one on bottom, the green and red one. Or I should say, it's the left-hand Rath schematic that I did. Let me say that correctly. So your input is on the left. And if you run along just left to right, I think I stopped actually following the trace once I got into the first gain stage, like after the JFET transistor, because I'm not exaggerating. Everything was identical. It just fell right into place. At first, I thought, oh, nothing of it, because that's kind of a typical HM2. It's a little slimmed down, but you know, input to your pull down resistor, your resistor and cap, and then a resistor to voltage reference into the JFET. It's very normal. But like I said, once I got into the gain staging, and everything was just, I mean, it literally just fell right into place as far as what the Dunwich schematic was. And just a heads up, the Dunwich schematic up top that I'm using, that was traced, I believe, by Fuzzhead years ago. So this has been online. I'm not like blowing anyone's secret or anything. So, yeah, the first value change that Joe did for the left-hand Wrath was he changed the input cap from 47 nanofarad up to 68 nanofarad. Let's see, what is it, C5, just before the third transistor there. He doubled that from 47 nanofarad to 100. And then the resistor and capacitor pair following the gain pot, he changed those, and he changed the resistor to voltage reference after the gain stage, right before the soft clipping. Other than that, I mean, like, everything is literally identical. As you can see here, the Dunwich did have clipping options, soft and hard, where the left-hand Wrath PCB just had like your standard basic Boss, like asymmetrical soft clipping, symmetrical hard clipping. That's everything there is identical. The left-hand Wrath, for those of you who've built HM2s before, there's always two 3.3K resistors after the clipping section, and before the output. Like, they basically border the EQ, the gyrator section. The left-hand Wrath bumped those up to 3.9K, which the first one, honestly, I think that's kind of pointless. If you're going to increase either one of those, I would increase the one that's actually in the EQ gain. The second one that's closest to the output, that's just off of the IC. So looking at the EQ section, the Dunwich pedal was set up for low, mid, and high. So if you compare that to the left-hand Wrath, which is ironically on the right side, the low, mid, and high gyrator section, anyone that's ever looked at an HM2 schematic knows that is like the Boss factory values for the EQ. That is absolutely standard EQ. There's nothing unique about that at all. The presence control, I think if I remember correctly, that puts the presence control at about 2800 hertz. So after that, compare it to the output section. Once again, identical. And you can take a look at the PCBs side by side. The Lone Wolf Audio or Enormous Door, it doesn't really matter because they're identical. That and the Dunwich, and I mean it is the exact part count. A few of the values are changed, but I think it is. God, what is it? It's like 32. They each have 32 resistors, 23 capacitors, three transistors, two dual op amps, and one quad op amp. Yeah, the only real difference about the boards, as far as the components that they have, is the Dunwich has clipping options, soft and hard. So there's going to be double the amount of diodes approximately. All right, so what we are left with after all of this, you have a couple options. If you want to build one of these, Capitalist Death Cult from Instagram was generous enough to donate some time and do up a strip board layout. So if you're not down with building PCBs, but you want to build the circuit from scratch, all by hand, that's one way to do it. I will have I'll have that up on my Instagram, and it'll most likely be uploaded to Dirtbox layouts. But if that's not your thing and you want to build a PCB, I will have those available at hm2cult.com. That's mostly worldwide shipping. There's a lot of shit going on in the world, so I apologize. There's some places that I can't get to that should be obvious. Other than that, thanks for watching, and I hope this was educational.